Whether you love Jake Paul and Most Valuable Promotions, or you hate Jake Paul and Most Valuable Promotions, you cannot deny that what they are doing this upcoming weekend, Saturday, May 16th, is a monumental, historic night for the sport that we all love, mixed martial arts. And that is because, for the first time ever, MMA is going to be seen on Netflix, the largest streaming platform in the world. With approximately 300 million global subscribers, it is almost a damn guarantee that this upcoming weekend's MVP MMA fight card on Netflix will be the most viewed mixed martial arts fight card of all time. But Jake Paul and Most Valuable Promotions aren't just hosting a mixed martial arts fight card on Netflix. They threw out all the stops in order to get some of the biggest name free agents in the fight game today on this card, and the main event is one that absolutely nobody saw coming. As a matter of fact, all three of the 5-round bouts are fights that no one saw coming, but the main event is Ronda Rousey, the second biggest superstar of all time in the sport, only behind one Conor McGregor, and the most high-profile, notable mixed martial arts female fighter of all time, hands down, bar none. And she is coming out of retirement to take on a fellow pioneer of women's mixed martial arts, an absolute OG to its core, and that is Gina Carano, the woman who put mixed martial arts on the map for females, dating back to her debut that would come nearly 20 years ago to the day on June 10th of 2006. But it's not only that. In the co-main event, we're seeing one of the other biggest stars in UFC history, top 10 for sure, and borderline on top 5, Nate Diaz, coming back having his first MMA bout since September of 2022 in a fight that he would be victorious in, a stoppage victory over Tony Ferguson, and he is taking on the face of bare knuckle fighting, Mike Perry. But as I said, there's 3 5-round headlining bouts on this card, and the third one will feature the lineal UFC heavyweight champion, some still say, Francis Ngannou, in his first fight post-PFL contract, taking on fellow former UFC heavyweight and PFL heavyweight Philipe Lins. Listen, none of these fighters are in their prime. None of these fighters are top 5 in the world in their respective weight classes, but they have name recognition, they have name value, and they have the credentials and resumes behind them backing them up going into this fight card. And I would be lying straight to your face if I said that I was not looking forward to this upcoming weekend's fight card on Netflix. Ever since the announcement of Gina versus Ronda, I have been very excited, let alone when we got the announcement of Ngannou being added to the card, and then when you factor in Mike Perry versus Nate Diaz, there's no way that that fight's going to be boring. They are truly pulling out all of the stops to make Most Valuable Promotions a legitimate player in the mixed martial arts space moving forward. At least I believe that's what their goal is to achieve. And especially when you hear how Ronda Rousey is talking about the build up to this fight and what it means to her returning, not just coming out of retirement to have a one-of-one fight against Gina, but she is viewing this card as something that can help the sport of mixed martial arts grow into the future, not only from a viewership perspective if they continue to have Netflix fight cards, but in terms of fighters who hit free agency, whether that's from the PFL, from one championship, from the UFC, looking to have greener and better pastures moving forward in their careers. Now there is a potential another player, and that is MVP and Jake Paul. I by no means have high expectations coming into this fight card in terms of seeing the highest level of mixed martial arts possible, but I do have expectations of being entertained and being very intrigued about what can come next. Because it's not just 3 5-round fights between aging veterans that have big names, but this is an entire 11-fight card featuring names such as Adriano Moraes, someone who is a former one championship champion and holds a knockout win over Demetrius Johnson. Jason Jackson, a former Bellator champion, will be on this card. Former Olympic bronze medalist in Taekwondo and UFC alum Robelis Despain is also on this card, following a great run that he has had in karate combat. Oh, and by the way, he's taking on former UFC heavyweight champion Junior Dos Santos. I think there's a little bit of everything for everybody on this card. There's young up-and-coming prospects that are getting their first big crack at the global spotlight. There's obviously the big names at the top of the bill, and then a mixture of things in between. And so I think it's hard to not be at least a little bit excited, even if you want to hate on Jake Paul, even if you want to hate on MVP, even if you want to hate on Ronda Rousey and all the shit that she's been saying heading into this fight card. This is something very cool. It's very unique. It's very different. And to be quite frank with you, I think it is a big, massive breath of fresh air for the sport of mixed martial arts that is obviously dominated by the UFC. Because while predominantly the UFC gives the fans what they want, we see the best fighters in the world fight the best fighters in the world, there are times where it leaves me feeling very flat and underwhelmed. Most recently, the UFC 328 main event, the so-called grudge match between Khamzat Chimaev and Sean Strickland, absolutely played out nowhere near the expectations that people had, and it instead led to a very lackluster title-changing performance where it left me with more questions than answers. And that's just really the tip of the iceberg, because it seems that more and more the UFC is more focused on profit rather than giving us what we want. And obviously I'm not saying that I want to see Ronda Rousey versus Gina Carano in the UFC headlining a pay-per-view, but again, it's just something different and that we need right now in the sport to switch things up, change it up a little bit. I'm obviously not going to go through all of these fights on a fight-by-fight breakdown perspective and talk about the X's and O's, but I do want to hit on those three big fights and some of the storylines surrounding them. Obviously, we know what Ronda Rousey is. She is the biggest female mixed martial artist of all time from a popularity perspective, and still one of the most accredited and greatest female fighters in UFC history, given what she accomplished during her brief run. She was the inaugural UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion, who had 6 championship victories inside of the UFC, second most in the 135-pound division's history outside of Amanda Nunes, the second longest win streak of all time at bantamweight, the most submission wins all time at bantamweight, so on and so forth. You know all of the accolades, but has not fought since December of 2016, 9.5 years ago, when she would lose to the aforementioned Amanda Nunes in what was the return fight for Ronda Rousey, because the fight before the Nunes loss for Ronda would be against Holly Holm in November of the year prior, 2015, and the head kick heard around the world would be landed by Holm to have one of the biggest upsets of all time, when she would dethrone Ronda Rousey to become the new women's bantamweight champion. In a headlining bout that still to this day is the second highest attended UFC event of all time, UFC 193, with 56,000 people in attendance. And after her UFC run, Ronda would go on to do big things in the WWE, staying in that TKO banner, even though it wasn't TKO at that time. Would also go on to become a mother with former UFC fighter Travis Brown, and now she is back 10 years later at 39 years of age, and whether it's a one-off or something starting a second run of her career, I am very curious to see how she is going to look, not to mention this fight will not be at bantamweight, but instead be at 145 pounds featherweight. As for her opponent, Gina Carano, an OG, a pioneer of women's mixed martial arts, this will be her first MMA bout since August 15th of 2009 against fellow pioneer of women's MMA, one of the greatest female mixed martial artists of all time, Cris Cyborg. That fight would end via first round knockout going toward the Brazilian, and that would actually be the first and only loss of Gina Carano's professional career, as prior to that, she was 7-0 with 4 finishes, and now she is 44 years of age, and her biggest goal in this fight in the lead up to getting this contract signed against Ronda Rousey was her getting her life back in order, getting back into shape and feeling like herself again. And so it is a beautiful story to hear how she got to this point, but how serious is she in terms of wanting to go in there, hurt Ronda Rousey and get a victory? That is the biggest question mark for me surrounding Carano heading into this bout, because on paper I think it's hard to side with her, being that Ronda Rousey is 5 years younger, has been more active just in combat sports more recently, and just has the better all-around one-of-one skill set with her judo background and Olympic bronze medalist to her name. For Nate Diaz, as I said, this is his first fight in mixed martial arts since September of 2022 and a victory against Tony Ferguson, but it's worth noting that since then he has gone on to box. He would lose a decision to his promoter of this fight card, Jake Paul, and then get a victory against former MMA opponent Jorge Masvidal. The Jake Paul bout would come in August of 2023, and the Masvidal boxing matchup would come in the summer of 2024, so this is now his first time competing at all in combat sports in nearly 2 years, and he will be 41 years old heading into this bout. Whereas for Platinum Mike Perry, he is still in the prime years if you want to talk combat sports athletes, because he is 34 years of age, however has not competed in a mixed martial arts bout since April of 2021, his final fight in the UFC, a loss to Daniel Rodriguez. However, unlike Nate Diaz's departure from the UFC and only having 2 combat sports events since, Mike Perry has fought 8 times in combat sports since that April 10th, 2021 loss in the UFC, and has won 7 out of the 8 and become the face of bare knuckle boxing. He holds victories over Michael Venom Page, who is a top 15 UFC welterweight, holds victories over Luke Rockhold, former UFC middleweight champion, holds a victory over Eddie Alvarez, former UFC lightweight champion, holds a victory over Thiago Alves, a former UFC title challenger many years ago, and holds a victory over Jeremy Stephens, who literally just fought at UFC 328 against Bobby King Green. As a matter of fact, the lone loss on his resume since departing from the UFC, much like Nate Diaz, also comes against the promoter of this fight card, and that was Jake Paul, who would knock him out in their boxing matchup. Not bare knuckle, mind you, but traditional boxing. So I think it's crazy when you consider that both of these guys have literally fought in the ring against the promoter of their event, Jake Paul, and are now fighting for him on this Netflix fight card. What a wild world we live in. But let me tell you something right now. Nate Diaz, Mike Perry, those two names clashing together against one another, there's not a world where this fight is going to be boring. It's just a matter of where the fight will go. Will Nate Diaz look to essentially box against the 7 years younger Mike Perry, who's been thriving in that sport, albeit bare knuckle? Or is Nate Diaz going to look to implement his grappling and slick jiu-jitsu skills to pull off another submission win, something that he has done numerous times over the long-standing career that he has had? And lastly, the Predator, Francis Ngannou. Some call him the lineal UFC heavyweight champion, being that he never lost that belt, but instead decided to leave the UFC in free agency. At 39 years of age, is back for the first time fighting in MMA since October of 2024 in his lone fight in the Professional Fighters League, when he would knock out Renan Ferreira in a dominant performance. And as a matter of fact, has not lost since July 7th of 2018 in that absolutely all-time classic bout against Derek Lewis. He's actually on a 7-fight win streak, with 6 of the 7 victories coming by way of knockout. The lone decision was a title fight against Cyril Gane. And so I'll be curious to see if Francis Ngannou can turn back the clock one more time, because he has a huge win streak in MMA, but we can't forget that he has also fought twice in boxing, and both of them would be losses, albeit the first against Tyson Fury, he nearly put off the upset and lost a very razor-thin decision. However, in his second boxing fight, that would come against Anthony Joshua, where he would be devastatingly knocked out. And during these years of ups and downs in terms of mixed martial arts competition for Francis, he's also gone through trauma and heartbreak in his personal life. And although it looks as though he has come out of that and has righted the ship in his career and had a more positive outlook lately, there's also been some negative press that has come out about him and his relationship with the UFC and how he treats people behind the scenes. Even though he gives off this presence of being that gentle giant and has that absolutely amazing backstory behind him, coming up from his roots in Africa, getting to Paris, France as a refugee, and making what he has done of his career, securing himself generational wealth and millions of dollars, being one of the greatest heavyweights of all time in UFC history, this man could have a movie made about his life. And he is taking on fellow UFC and PFL alum Philipe Lins, who at 40 years of age is actually on a 4-fight win streak entering this MVP MMA card, but has not fought since March of 2024, over 2 years ago. It was a decision win over Jan Kudalaba. Obviously, Philipe Lins doesn't necessarily have the name value as these other big stars on this card, but all in all, he would go 4-2 in his 6-fight UFC career and would become a PFL champion during their 2018 season. And then if you peel the curtain back just a little bit further, you see that he even competed in Bellator against names such as Vadim Nemkov, who is one of the greatest fighters on the planet right now, not in the UFC. So he has high-level experience in 3 of the biggest organizations in mixed martial arts, and he can absolutely be big-time spoiler and big-time underdog if he gets the victory against Francis Ngannou on Saturday night. So I want to turn the discussion over to you guys. What are your overall thoughts on this Jake Paul Most Valuable Promotions Ronda Rousey headlining MMA event on Netflix? Sound off down below, because as I already said for myself, I am very excited, I am very intrigued, and I am looking forward to this breath of fresh air for the sport. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new, because every single week I break down the biggest and best fights and storylines heading into each card. In the aftermath, I recap the most meaningful results, and I give my thoughts and opinions on MMA news and fight announcements. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok, as well as like the Facebook page Verbal Sparring MMA, and you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where every Monday and Friday podcast episodes release there. Have a great weekend, enjoy this one-of-one event, at least for now, and I will catch you all in the next video.